Hi, everyone, and I am very honored to be joined today by Andrea Cohen, who is, of course, an advisor and friend to Archetype. So Chris Harrington here, Chief Growth Officer at Archetype, and again, joined here by Andrea. She is founder and vice chair of Houseworks. She's also on the board of the Caregiver Action Network, and she's on the board of the Home Care Association of America. So Andrea, thanks so much for joining today, and I appreciate you carving out a couple minutes for us to talk about really this very topical item of family caregivers.
Great. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here and teach you everything I know about how to provide the kind of support that we need to for family caregivers.
Nice. Thank you. So to kind of help to frame this, what do we mean when we talk about family caregivers? Andrea, for those of
So
us
that's
who
a great
are watching, for those of us who might be watching and not be aware.
So family caregivers, it's basically someone in the family or a close friend that takes care of someone who isn't well. And just to give you a sense of the pervasiveness of it is 1 in 5 Americans are family caregivers right now. And of those family caregivers, most of them are in worse health than other people. So you've got a lot of family caregivers. And then the average age of a family caregiver is about 50. That doesn't mean that, millennials aren't taking care of their grandparents and spouses at the age of, I've dealt with family caregivers who are 80. But the majority of them fall into that like 50 to 64 age range. And a majority of them provide a caregiving sort of from 4 to 5 years, so an episode of caregiving. But remember now, with all these mixed families, lots of times people are caring for more than one person at once, or you finish up with one and you start with another. So it's really big for these family caregivers. And of these family caregivers, about 60% of them are working.
Jeez,
And, so just think about it. 60% of them are working. A lot of them are, a little more than half are working full time. And reportedly, at least 2/3 of them have had one incident at work that has impacted their work life when they became family caregivers. So employers have to know what's going on, and employees have to speak up.
Yeah, well, it's interesting you say that. So I can only imagine what it's like to, be a working caregiver. So you've got, of course, a 9 to 5 job. No surprise that there is data out there that reports that working caregivers do have higher levels of stress compared with their peers and colleagues and bosses who may not be, may not currently at least have that onus of caregiving. What can employers do to better support the well-being of their employees who are caregivers?
Yeah, and I think, first of all, I think it's important for them to understand the business issue, because that's going to be very motivating for people. So American businesses, just on the whole, can lose as much as $34 billion each year. And that's a lot of money. That's not to say, smaller, medium-sized businesses, you're going to see that level of impact. But what I think people don't understand is that, in general, 8% of healthcare costs for these, family caregivers' healthcare costs go up by 8%. And so not only are businesses losing in terms of productivity and the cost of retention, their healthcare costs are going up. So first, just level the playing field, understand that it's an issue. I mean, when I first started out in this many, many years ago, no one, people might talk about their kids, but they'd never talked about their parents. You just didn't bring that to work. And, clearly there's been a big shift in that. And so I think it's important that people know that. And then I also think it's important for the employer to just understand how it impacts the employee, like know what's going on in their company about that. Either a lot of them have to go in late, they have to leave early, they have to take time off to provide care. They're cutting back on their working hours, they're taking a leave of absence. Many of them get performance warnings. But so the caregiver is just under stress because these caregivers are used to doing a good job. And now all of a sudden they feel like they can't do a good job at anything. They're not doing well by their their loved one and they're not doing well by their employer because they're having to make all of these changes. So once you understand that in terms of what they can do, I mean, my biggest thing when I thought about that question was allow for transparency, allow them to be able to talk about it at work, allow them, give them the space to do that. And, over the past, I've done things like I've provided seminars at workplaces, and just like people would look and see who's around the room and they didn't even know that their colleagues were, also dealing with a parent. So that really helped them know that they weren't alone. So, and just allowing them and giving them the space to talk about it, I think is really very helpful. And, being clear about what benefits are available to them, which I know we're going to talk about soon, but, let them know, because we also know that family caregivers do best when they can both have their job and do their work. So let them know what benefits are available to them so they can make use of them.
Let's pivot to that then on the benefits piece and, policies, practices at large. What can employers implement to start to protect and care for caregiver employees?
Sure. So first of all, there's paid sick days. There's paid sick days. So allowing the employee to use their sick time to take care of a parent is really important, because they don't want to keep taking time off and they're all worried about that. So employers can make that happen. Flexible work hours. So, if they have to be off site to take them to a doctor's appointment and they have to do work at night, that's okay. And they shouldn't have to do that under the radar. They should be able to just come out and say that. Employee assistance programs, just, elder care is generally a part, or caregiving is generally a part of an employee assistance program. So have them. We used to do backup care for people. So if someone were in an emergency and they needed backup care, someone could go to their home while they went to work. Or sometimes the company would actually subsidize the care while the family member had to work, because there's also financial issues because they're having to afford help and they might not have sort of put that into their financial plan. So it's an extra added expense. So subsidizing those kinds of benefits for families often helps. Just really, there's unpaid family leave, there's family and medical, there's lots going on sort of in the public sector, who also realizes that they have to be doing a lot more to support family caregivers on a state and federal level.
Gotcha. What do you think employees, the caregivers themselves, value the most? If they could pick and choose between maybe some of the benefits and policies and practices, what do you think they value the most?
Well, I think they should be able to take leave when they need to, and that's pretty much in place now. Because you have to remember that, like, family caregivers don't necessarily want to leave their jobs. They sort of see sometimes their jobs as an escape from some of the stuff they're dealing with at home as it gets more progressed. But there'll also be a time when the family member really wants to be home. So, you kind of got to ask them, where are you at? Like, what is it that you want to do and be? But I think they value, like I said before, it's so important to have their supervisor to be able to talk about it with. And I read a report that said half of the supervisors had no idea that their employee was in a situation they were providing family care. So even though, 20 years ago when I started out, no one talked about it, not everybody's still talking about it now, but I think that's sort of being encouraged, and let people talk to each other. I mean, these support groups are doing something or saying, it's not something that the family member has to go to, but just to know that there's other people at the workplace that might be in the same situation as them is really important to people.
So the feedback for supervisors, managers, leaders, business owners is kind of clear, right? Make that space and ask those questions for people. But in instances where an employee maybe, is working for somebody who maybe isn't aware,
right?
What can employees do to advocate for themselves in a way that's comfortable for them?
Yeah, I mean, they should figure it out. A lot of states have paid family leave now. They all have unpaid family leave, but a lot of them have paid family leave. Massachusetts, where I'm from, is one of those states. So make sure that that before they start advocating for themselves, they understand what they're entitled to through their workplace. And then I would suggest that they came up with a plan, like look at your financial situation, see how much time you can use before or after an event. So make a plan and don't waver from it, because I think they need to do that. And if they're feeling like they're being discriminated against because they're not at the workplace, and but they're taking the time off, they should be talking to the HR people, and they should be talking to their managers. And many times it might just be a communication issue, and it might be one person that just doesn't understand. But like, employers have to understand that, especially in this day and age where it's harder and harder to recruit people, culture is so important. And having an open culture for anything is important, but especially family caregiving, when there's so much guilt involved in family caregiving that you always feel like you should be doing it yourself, and then you're at work. So it's like a setup. So like, allowing people to unleash that feeling of guilt is really important for them.
What
So
are what are some of the things you're working on, and maybe even some resources that might be available for family caregivers?
well, I think you mentioned in the beginning that I'm on the board of the Caregiver Action Network. And if you go to their website, you can just Google Caregiver Action Network. There's a lot of resources, not only for employed caregivers, but for every caregiver. I think it's important that people understand that every state in Massachusetts and nationally has what they call area agencies on aging. And you can find out the state agency on aging in each state that you're in, no matter what state that you're in. And then once you get to the state, you can figure out, where you live in that state, and there'll be an area agency on aging, which is generally a mixture of federal and state funding. And they all have information and referral units, because I think what happens is that most family members that I've spoken to just don't know where to start. So sometimes I just need that first person. I'm often that first person. I've become like the most popular person at a cocktail party because they know what I do. So what do I do about my mother? And it's great. It's like a gift to be able to give to people, but it's really, sometimes I wonder what would happen if they didn't know somebody. So information referral, area agencies on aging, resources like the Caregiver Action Network, and other new resources that have sprung up for caregivers, I think is really important. And, figuring out a way on the technology side, even figuring out a way to make sure that the person you're caring for isn't isolated. So, they have things, they're called grandpads, or that you can FaceTime them, making sure that that person knows how to get outside their own world with technology, I think would really help too. And then, in terms of other kinds of resources that are available, I think we talked about subsidy. One of the things that I'm spending a lot of time with now, though, is mindfulness. And I think we spoke about this a little bit before the call. But teaching families mindfulness and being able to sort of get on top of their family caregiving situation is really important. So I would suggest thinking about learning kinds of meditation. We offered a series of sessions to family caregivers. It was all virtual. It was right during the pandemic, and the family caregivers would get on, and I had professionals leading it, mindfulness professionals leading it, and it was unbelievable. It's just like the power of these caregivers learning from each other, and then they started a bond with each other. And there's another really great resource that a friend of mine runs. It's called Daughterhood. And it's just a place for daughters to go who are family caregivers, and sort of there's communities set up all over the country. Those are just a few. There's actually a lot, but it's
Yeah.
important. You can do it virtually, you can do it in person, you can do it at your workplace, you can do it with your friends. There's lots of ways to do it.
Yeah. Well, I think, like you said, this is something that sometimes has been in the shadows. And so I think going into some of these resources and beginning to educate ourselves on it is an important next step. But Andrea, thank you again for this time, all that you do for Archetype, and obviously the really great work that you're doing on this really important issue. So we really appreciate it, and look forward to seeing what you're able to accomplish in the future.
Thank you. And I appreciate having time to speak out.
Awesome.
Okay. Take care.